of they increase who eat them is talking about other people who have great riches. One person gets wealthy and suddenly he or she notices there's a lot of other people who are wealthy. And he begins to ask, well, what advantage do I have? Am I any different? Am I any better? So it can increase jealousy on our part, and the more we accumulate, if we become, and when we become, jealous toward others. You remember what the 10th commandment is, the original 10 commandments given at Sinai? We're prone to say the Old Testament law, the 10 commandments, were all outward actions, that they dealt less with the heart. And yet the 10th command, you may remember, was, you shall not covet. Later in the New Testament, Paul would say, Colossians 3 verse 5, that covetousness is idolatry. So in the 10 commandments, the last commandment was, you shall not covet what your neighbor possesses. In a way, it's combining all of the previous 9 commandments. If you covet what belongs to your neighbor, if you covet what does not belong to you, you're telling God, what you've given me is not enough. And you're beginning to compare yourself and compete with your neighbor and say, well, what they have is what I want. Or what I want so that my neighbor can't have it, or so they can look and see me having it so that they then feel inferior. When we focus on riches, we begin to feed greed. It also invites jealousy and those strained relationships because of that. Verse number 12, number 3. Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much. But the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt. See, the laborer, the poor laborer, he might sometimes go without a meal. He might have to sleep on an empty stomach, but he still rests because he's working and he's laboring and he's just content. Doesn't matter if he's full or not, he still sleeps well. But the rich man can have this luxurious, full meal, full stomach, and yet he still has anxiety because he's hoarded it all for himself. He's kept it for himself to his own harm. And so while we might believe the lie that riches ease anxiety, when we focus on riches for the source of satisfaction and meaning, they quickly cause harm and danger. They increase anxiety. They increase threats. So the poor doesn't have those same concerns. And so he's able to sleep soundly at night. Number 4, from verse number 14, those riches that he hoarded to himself, to his own harm, verse 13, those riches were lost in a bad venture. He is a father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. We might believe that riches can last in this life, that whatever I accumulate and whatever I hold on to, it's going to last the course of this life. And yet Solomon is saying he held on to it, it caused him harm, and then he lost it all. We need to remember that riches are lost every single day, whether it's by being stolen, mistreated by others, or misplaced by our own carelessness. They can be lost. See, greed loves to convince us that money can be made overnight. You can become wealthy overnight. You hit it big, you do this, you do that. And yet Solomon is reminding us it's far more accurate to remember that riches are lost often overnight than that they are gained overnight. Verse number 15, observation number 5. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Not only might we buy the lie that riches last in this life, but we might think that somehow accumulating riches means something for life after death. And Solomon is saying it won't matter. That you won't even carry your clothes on your body to life after this one. That just as you came into the world naked from your mother's womb, so too you'll leave this life with nothing that you possess. Doesn't matter what our net worth is leading up to our death, as soon as we breathe our final breaths, that net worth is always 0. Verse number 17. Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness and much vexation and sickness and anger. So we might think wrongly that riches will solve life's problems. I can sleep comfortably, I can live comfortably because look at what all I have. And yet he's saying there are plenty of rich people who eat in darkness because they're afraid, they're depressed, their lives have been made difficult. Actually, riches can often increase problems, is the truth. Instead of living with this bountiful comfort, he lives with bitter regret and anxiety. It doesn't take us long to see that the more we buy, the more we have to spend and buy to keep up what we bought. And sometimes that just increases the problems that we have. But then look at verse number 18. This is the final section, the final observation. You'll see a contrast, okay? You see one section, one man talked about in verses 18 through 20, and then the opposite of that in the first two verses of chapter 6. So the first perspective, verse number 18. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for that is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and to rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. See, there is a man who can have and who can possess and who can enjoy because he recognizes God has given it to him, and because he recognizes God is the one who's allowed him to enjoy it. Okay, so this is Solomon going back to what he realized in chapter 2, especially chapter 2 and verse 25. Apart from him, who can eat, who can find enjoyment in life apart from God? When we seek to please God and fear God, we then open up this brand new world of being able to enjoy what he gives. But then look at what happens, chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. He continues, but this is the opposite. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun. It lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. See, there's introducing a slightly different aspect. It's his desire that's fueling him. God's still giving it, but he's not invited God into the process. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It's a grievous evil. See, there is a path to enjoying what we possess, but it's only by starting with God, with fearing God, seeking to please God, instead of focusing on the things that we do possess. We cannot imagine that somehow the more we accumulate, it'll be automatic that we'll get to enjoy it. We can enjoy it and will enjoy it when our true joy is found in God and from God. Thinking about some of these ideas, several of them, but especially that point number 6, that the more we spend, the more we have to keep spending to maintain what we spent. I remember a sermon from when I was middle school or high school, and that was the point being made. It was being stressed. The more you buy, the more you have to keep on spending. And I remember the preacher used the illustration of a boat. You buy a boat, you have to keep buying to keep up the boat and store the boat and fix the boat and all that. And I don't remember the sermon because it was just an exceptional sermon. It was the best sermon or anything like that. As far as I remember, it was a quote, normal sermon on these kind of things. I remember it, though, because of what happened the day or two afterward. That was preached on a Sunday, and on the Monday afternoon or the Tuesday afternoon, I don't remember exactly which, my parents and I had our directory picture with Olin Mills, had that scheduled at the building. And so we were dressed up, and we were sitting in the hallway waiting to go back and have our picture made, and in walked, at the same time, a couple, an elderly couple, and it's not a stretch, it's not any kind of guess or inappropriate kind of observation to say, everyone assumed they were the wealthiest family in the church. Just, they were the wealthiest couple. Just makes sense. And so we sat there, we had our, and then she said, you know he's right, don't you? And we looked at her. We've never really had much of a conversation with her. She speaks up and says, he's right. And we kind of look at her like, okay, who's right about what? And she said, the preacher from Sunday. He said, and stressed, you know, the more you spend, the more you have to keep spending to take care of and to fix what all you bought. And she said, today's been a long day. We've had, in order to be able to have an elevator at our house. So here we had the wealthiest family telling us, don't focus on riches. Don't get caught up in what you can buy because it'll keep on costing and causing more problems. The more you spend, the more you have to keep spending. It can create more and more problems. You may have seen in the news this week, the past week or two, another company is kind of going under, costing a lot of people a lot of billions. This is a cryptocurrency exchange company. My understanding is they didn't really possess any, quote, cryptocurrency, that digital currency. They just helping other people buy it. And so people would invest and spend their money with them. They would hook people up with that. And what happened is customers started figuring, hey, they're in bed with some of these other companies, and I'm wondering, are they using my money in those other companies, my investment? So hey, can you just give me my money back? And once they started doing that, this company, FTX, didn't have enough liquid to be able to give all the customers their money, and it went poof, belly up, filed bankruptcy. Net worth at the time of bankruptcy, $15 billion with a B. This guy's, the CEO, former CEO, is trying to sell his house in the Bahamas, 9-bedroom house, I think, for like $39 million. The lawyer who's now in charge of the company, who's been assigned the company to try to clean up the mess and all of that, make sure they don't get away with it, he was also a part of the Enron case from 20-something years ago. The lawyer has already come out and said it's the worst case he's ever seen in terms of their ineptitude and how irresponsible they've been. Now, we sit here and we hear billions and millions, and we think, whoa, that's bad. But I just imagine if we sat down with Solomon after hearing him in chapter 5 and chapter 6, and we tried to kind of make a big deal about the money, don't you think he'd just look back at us and say, I'm not shocked? I've had it all, he would say. I've seen other people who've had almost as much as I've had. And I can tell you, I'm not surprised in the slightest that it's here one day and gone the next. That people will make their own decisions and be cruel and evil based on its allure. He would not be shocked because it's the way he might warn us. Something along the lines of this. You kind of look down on this digital currency, but you need to know that your, quote, real currency, your real cash assets they're just as vulnerable as anything that's out there digital, because none of it will last. None of it will last beyond your life, and none of it will last beyond an eternity. So the warning is real. Have a feeling. After hearing these 7 things, they may be reminders to us, but we probably intellectually have heard those before. We might even be quick to say, well, yeah, that's obvious, that makes sense, I agree with that. What Solomon does next is very important in chapter 6, beginning of verse number 3. And it's to wake us up and shake us into this emotionally. He's going to give us 2 illustrations. And it's these illustrations that really challenge us to be sure we truly believe God's warning in these matters. So let's begin reading chapter number 6, verse number 3. These are realizations from the meaninglessness we see. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the day of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, he also has no burial. I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. So the first example of this is that you take a man and you give him all he's ever wanted, and he still just wishes he had a little more. And he has innumerable children. That would have been a sign of wealth, because look at how long his legacy can last. At the end of it all, he's not satisfied. His kids obviously don't love him because he has no burial. The baby who never breathes a life of breath, he's just born dead. That baby is better off. I just found myself when studying this, I'm quick to believe and intellectually accept the premises of chapter 5, verse 10 through chapter 6, verse 2. But how deeply do I believe that from verse number 3? That it had been better for him to have never born, essentially, never be born, than to accomplish and achieve everything that he could have wanted and never be satisfied. Listen to the 3 observations that happen beginning in verse number 4 as to why it's better. The stillborn child is better because he has not lived a life doing things to regret. It even says that no one knows and remembers his name. So verse number 4, it comes in vanity and goes in darkness. In darkness, its name is covered. Nobody knows the stillborn child's name on earth. And yet people who mismanage money, who cannot be satisfied with money, who turn off their family because of money, their names are known and not remembered fondly. The stillborn child is better than the one who follows after riches. Number 2, from verse number 5. Moreover, it, the stillborn child, has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. You see, going back to some of the things Solomon's already said, the rich person can't really find sleep at night because his focus is on riches, not on better things and greater things. Well, the stillborn child who never breathes a breath of life, he finds rest in death. But the wealthy who can't be satisfied does not find that rest. And then number 3 from verse number 6, even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, he's doubling down. It's not just a long life. He says if this rich man found a way to live 2,000 years, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to one place? See, the stillborn child and the unsatisfied rich person both go to the same realm of death. Doesn't matter how long you live, doesn't matter how much you accumulate, doesn't matter how many people are born into the world because of you, you still go to the realm of death. When we think about this extreme example, it would seem that a stillborn child is better than a man who got everything he wanted. What did Jesus say about the greedy disciple, the greedy apostle of his, Judas? Woe to him by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better that he never was born. We can focus so quickly on all that we want, and our desires rule our lives. And yet Solomon and Jesus are warning us, don't begin that road of desire. Second illustration begins verse number 7, Ecclesiastes 6. All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. Simple truth. Why do you work? Well, I work to eat. I work to feed my family. I work to provide. Well, soon the meal that you eat's got to be digested. As good of a meal as we may have Thursday or whatever day we eat Thanksgiving meal this week, guess what? We're still going to have to eat Friday morning. We're still going to have to eat Friday and Saturday. As good as the meal may be, it will not fully satisfy us. We'll have to go back and keep eating again. Well, you work to feed, and then you feed, and then what happens? Well, you got to keep working to keep feeding and keep working and keep feeding. If you focus only on the riches, you'll soon see they're only consumed, and then what next? So I love verse number 9 because it's a bit of a transition verse, but it's all observation, all right? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. He's introducing the idea of contentment. Better is the sight of the eyes. It's better to look at and be thankful for what I have than to keep consuming. But then he says this is vanity. It's because he has not yet introduced paying attention and trying to kind of do what's right and good is probably going to have the realization of verse number 9. Hey, you know it'd be better if we just appreciate what we have instead of trying to hoard it. But then it's that causes them to think. See, only realizing the stuff is better than consuming still doesn't get us anywhere. But it is the starting point to realizing God has given it to us all. And so this week is an example of that, how untold millions of people who live, for the lack of a better word, ungratefully will pause and say, let's be thankful. But they need to, and we need to ask, who are we thankful to? It's good to say we're thankful, but who are we thankful to? What's his role in all of this? And that's where he lands, beginning of verse